Hello, and welcome back to Mr. Duffick's Technical Writing Unit. This is the fifth video in a series of the technical writing information that I've come up with during this distance learning period. And this fifth lesson is going to be on proposals. So proposals. Proposals are something you see not just in the engineering field, but all around business. Just every industry you can imagine that transfers money from one hand to another is going to have some form of proposal attached to it. I put a very strict version or strict definition of proposal right here. It's to offer to carry out research or to provide a product or service. So proposals, the one we're going to talk about today, are geared towards technical writing. So they're physical documents you would hand to someone or send to someone. But if you think about proposals, people make proposals almost on a daily basis, right? When you propose something, you give an idea. Hey, Mom, can I borrow the car? Hey, boss, can I have the day off? And when you make these proposals, often there is a bit of persuasion that gets added in there. Hey, Mom, can I borrow the car because I can run this errand? Or, hey, boss, can I have the day off? I'll come in over the weekend or something like that. And just like a normal audible proposal that you might make to someone, these paper proposals that you would send to someone often have some sort of persuasion tied into it, whether it's in the wording or just the intent of why you are writing the proposal. Often it's used to try to get someone to give you money or to accept a service you provide or something like that. So naturally, there's a lot of different ways you can apply this to any industry, but especially the engineering and manufacturing one. All right, so there's two different proposals. The first being internal and the second being external. So internal proposals are just referring to proposals that are written and sent within a single organization. For instance, within a single corporation, right, or a manufacturing facility, you have an executive receive a proposal, someone from the maintenance department or something like that. But hey, we need a new machine, or hey, we need new tools to work on machines. And oftentimes these are going to be in writing, digitally, and they're going to outline a certain number of details. And so when someone usually submits some kind of internal proposal, they're aiming to benefit or improve the organization in some way. And I just cited the example with the maintenance. Hey, we need this machine so we can run quicker, or the machine won't break down as often. So pretty much every time you send a proposal, it is to, especially in the internal sense, you are sending it to accomplish some goal or to receive something that in effort is going to benefit both parties. It's going to benefit the organization overall. And so internal proposals can go back and forth, but they generally stay in the area. Whereas the second type of proposal, the external proposal, are proposals that are sent outside of your organization. And you're going to see these in a variety of forms. One way is going to be for people that can perform services for you or sell you products, right? So if you're trying to build some kind of machine or perform or get some kind of contractor to come in and do work on a facility or a machine or something like that, and then you are going to request for a quote. The technical term that they use in industry is information for bid, or IFB. And the other version of that is a request for a proposal. But these are both forms of the solicited proposal, meaning that you want this proposal, you're expecting this kind of proposal. You're the one requesting it from an outside supplier or contractor, requesting that they give you some sort of quote for work. And for the difference between those two, the information for bid and request for proposal. So typically you put out a bid for something, and multiple different entities, in that case suppliers or organizations, have an opportunity to try to give you an offer. So if you want something specific, like, hey, I need 100 new computers for my office. You put out a bid, and different companies will approach you and say, hey, I can give you these 100 computers for this price, or oh, I can give you these 100 computers for this price. And the different companies try to offer in response to that bid. Whereas a request for proposal are usually geared toward one company or just a handful of companies. And they're for less specialized products. They're more for like a made-to-order type thing. Like, hey, we need a solution for this. What do you have? And companies will approach you and say, well, we can do this for you. And another company, well, we can do that for you. Different solutions, but they're still trying to tackle the same problem or concern that the original organization that is producing that proposal is trying to solve. And then the other kind of external proposal will be the unsolicited, which is kind of a misnomer because it implies that those that are receiving the proposal aren't expecting it. It's unsolicited. It's not warranted. They aren't actively trying to receive it. But there might be some kind of implication that a quote or a proposal would be appreciated, or it might help a little bit. It wasn't specifically requested, but maybe it was talked about, in a conversation offhand, and later on one of the organizations sends a proposal. It wasn't specifically requested, but it was kind of up in the air, and the person sending that proposal thought it would help. Okay, so here's the general structure of any proposal that you're going to write. It's going to contain a summary, of course, of the entire proposal, an introduction, talking about the problem you're trying to solve with the proposal and stuff like that. The proposed program, so any kind of solution you're trying to come up with, or the procedure by which you are trying to come up with that solution, and then any qualifications and experience, just so you can try to kind of sell yourself. If you're trying to write a proposal to someone, you want to make sure that the person is confident that you can actually perform the work or perform the service or the product or something like that. Toward the end, you're going to have a budget, which is very, very important when it comes to proposals. It's one thing to propose some kind of solution, but if it's going to cost a buttload of money, you don't want you're the executive or your boss or supervisor or whoever is not going to accept it. And then lastly, you're going to have appendices potentially at the ends of these things. So when you are writing proposals, typically they are going to be sent for certain kind of personnel. So any kind of contractors or specialists, if a machine breaks down, for instance, you got to send a proposal to their company for technicians or something like that to come out and help you. There might be for new facilities, whether you need to build a new warehouse for storage or inventory, or maybe more machines or something like that, or equipment. So you need new machines, you need more forklifts or something like that. You need to submit a proposal to the appropriate companies, as well as internally to your superiors and things like that, so they can start the process of getting money allocated. All right, so the summary of a proposal. So the summary is generally pretty short. You want to stay within about 250 words. That can go up and down a little bit depending on the size of the proposal and the size of the project. Typically about 250 words, so a paragraph or two, single spaced. So the first section in that proposal is going to be the summary, and that's not a big surprise, right? The summary is typically in any kind of essay is going to be, or document, is going to be toward the beginning. The summary is there for people that sometimes people don't have time to read the entire report, or maybe they're an executive or something and they just need to see the details, some details here and there, maybe the results. They don't need all the nitty-gritty details. So some people need to read into the details of the proposal, but mostly, or to some extent, some people just kind of need to read a summary so they can move it along the approval chain. So it also summarizes the major elements within a few sentences for each section. So in typical summary fashion, you're going to try to summarize each major section of this report and not skipping much. So you are going to have the results in there and the budget potentially. and that way someone like an executive that is reading it is able to get the information they need to move it along the approval chain. The three sections you really want to focus on, though, are going to be the problem that you're trying to solve with your proposal, followed by the solution or the method you use to solve that problem. And then lastly, you're going to list the qualifications and experience to alleviate any kind of concerns the reader might have with the people providing the service or product. And then lastly, of course, you're going to have a completion date and a final budget in that summary. It's one thing to work on a project and, it can last much longer than it's supposed to, which means it's going to cost a lot more than it's supposed to, which is not okay. There's a saying that goes in industry, under budget and before a deadline or something like that. You're aiming to spend under the budget and to complete the project before the deadline. Anything past that is going to cause a lot of headaches. It's going to cost more money. And generally, the person that is funding the proposal, funding the project, is not going to be too happy. So then we move on to the introduction section of the report. And this is where you state the problem statement. And when you go into industry, you see oftentimes that people don't like the word problem. They like to use the word opportunity. So they like to say, okay, what kind of opportunities do we have instead of what kind of problems do we have to fix? What kind of opportunities do we have? What kind of solutions do we have for these opportunities? They say that, number one, of course, to make things sound a little more positive, right? You rather try to take advantage of an opportunity than try to solve a problem, right? A million opportunities sounds better than a million problems. So it's a nice little lingo. In the introduction, there might be at least one proposed solution that you've come up with or the supplier has come up with for the problem. You're going to have a background of the problem, so you're going to talk about why the problem is occurring, any factors that have caused the problem, because those might be very helpful when deeming what an appropriate solution might be. You're also going to talk about the sources of information that you use as evidence or as reference when you are conducting your project or your experiment. You want to make sure that you cite those sources, and later on you'll have a works cited page or whatever, perhaps. But right here you just kind of want to casually drop a couple names or a couple pieces of information so they know that you did some research and it is based off of some credible evidence. You also want to put the scope of the method or the solution process that you want to go through. How big is it going to be? How small is it going to be? How much money is it going to require? Are there any constraints based off of time, not just deadlines, but maybe there's a time window of when you can actually work on the project or when certain pieces of the project can be worked on or completed or messed with. Or, not only that, does it benefit one facility of an organization? Does it develop the entire corporation? How big is this project you are undertaking? How big is the service that is going to be accepted through this proposal? And then certain specialized or unusual terms are often explained in the introduction. So for people that are not familiar with any technical terms you might have or just terms used within the field the proposal is being written with in mind, you might want to define some specific terms or acronyms or things like that so you don't have to keep repeating definitions and whatnot throughout the proposal. So the proposed program. So the proposed program, again, is just that is going to be your place where you explain the solution. And it's important to not just state the solution like, oh, well, I think this is a correct answer. You have to always back up why, right? You always have to justify. And so you have to walk through how exactly you came up with the solution and why you think it is the best solution. And with that, you are going to want to outline any plan you have to come up with that solution with specifics. You want to be as specific as possible, give as many details as possible to again give you credibility, and so people can follow along and see how legitimate your proposal is, and how likely your solution is going to be successful. And then you also want to cite any appropriate literature here as well. Literature is just means, like references. It means something like journals, peer review journals, articles, and other such documents that you could use as evidence. Any kind of report, stuff like that. All right, then you're going to jump down to the qualifications and experience page. So it might not come as a surprise to hear that the more dense, the larger the scope of the proposal, the larger the problem you're trying to fix, you need more experience, more qualifications to quell any fear that you don't know what you're doing. The more work experience specifically that you have, the more broad your work is. So not just that you're specialized working on one type of machine or one type of product, but you maybe are broad enough on a variety of products. Or maybe in the case of this proposal, it does help to have a very specific work experience, very specified skill set. But regardless, you want to outline that. You want to basically try to convince the person who is going to be accepting the proposal and therefore paying you that you are the best one for the job. And what you want to do in this section is you do want to outline general qualifications, sure, but if you have a team, and you should always have a team that of people that are working on it, then you want to outline the qualifications of each individual member and how they're going to contribute to coming up with that solution. And that way, people know who to contact if they have certain questions or certain issues, aside from like a project manager or something like that. If you have someone with a specific skill set or knowledge set, and you have a question about that material, obviously you're going to ask them instead of someone else from the team. And the external proposals should discuss supplier qualifications as well. So when proposals are sent out for help from a supplier, naturally the qualifications from that supplier need to be present. Okay, budgeting. So external proposals typically have more detailed budgets because you are more likely to spend more money outside of your organization. People try to sell things. People want to, they might offer a good solution, but they might try to throw a bunch of stuff in there. So you, I guess, purchase more, right? You're going to have a lot of line items, meaning you're going to have a very specific budget. You're not just going to say, oh, this machine is going to cost $50,000. You're going to outline certain assemblies of the machine, or maybe certain different models of the machine, or you're going to talk about why this version of the machine is different from this version, or maybe you're going to do multiple different machines. But you're going to be more specific when it comes to the budget instead of just saying, well, the project is set to cost $100,000. You have to be more specific with the external proposals. And these budgets are divided into two different costs. And this information gets into kind of accounting stuff. So if your parents if any of them are accountants, or you're familiar with any accounting type stuff, you have direct and indirect costs. And the direct costs are things that the company pays directly. So they pay the salaries of the employees. They pay what they call fringe benefits. If you're in industry, they'll just call it fringe generally. That just means all benefits people get. So like sick days or vacation days or health insurance or things like that, that's fringe benefits. So companies have to pay for that. Any travel expenses, any equipment that's bought to work on a project, or of course any raw materials or supplies. And the other type of the cost is going to be indirect. It's often called overhead in industry. You'll hear overhead much more frequently than indirect costs. And that's like utilities, like electricity, water, gas, any kind of maintenance costs that are tied with, machines, anything like that. And then anything like clerical or secretary work, anything kind of at the front office, over with the HR or with accounting or things like that. It's coming up with a budget for stuff like this is very interesting because you have to take time into consideration. For instance, with one of the direct costs, salaries. Let's say a company is on, they have a maintenance worker that makes like 70 grand a year. And when you're budgeting for a project, let's say the project is going to take 6 months, so that maintenance person is devoting 6 months of their time to the project. And so when you're coming up with this proposal, you have to factor in half of the 70 grand salary they are receiving, so 35 grand. So you're going to say that 35 grand is going to be the salary cost for this project. So it's very expensive. Some people might say like, oh, well, we're going to pay him anyway. Sure, yeah, of course. But that is maintenance time. That's manpower that can be spent doing something else that is productive. So you're taking that maintenance time and you're shifting it back toward your proposal, your project. And so therefore it's going to cost you stuff because you can't use it over there. You can almost call it opportunity cost, which is another kind of an economic term. And that goes for all the indirect stuff too, like utilities maintenance. So you're going to factor in 6 months of utilities in there, for instance, 6 months electricity, 6 months of water, whatever is being used. Maintenance is an interesting one because you might do maintenance during the project form, but let's say you're buying a new machine. You're going to have to perform maintenance for years after you purchase this machine, right? And so technically you got to include that cost of maintenance. So if we have to include, for instance, 10 hours of maintenance on the machine every year, then you have to take, if the hourly salary is like $50 an hour, and it's going to be 10 hours a year, then you have 500 hours or $500 you have to factor in for maintenance every year as well. So it's an expensive project. And that goes on for the entirety of the machine life. So it's just things to consider when you're coming up with a budget. It gets pretty complicated. Things aren't necessarily free, even though they might seem they are sometimes. All right, and the last part here is the appendix of your proposal. And this is where you want to put in a bunch of graphs, tables, and you want to put maybe a timeline of where you think or how long the project is going to take. So oftentimes there's what's called a task schedule there, and there's different forms of a task schedule. You can make a table like the one here, and it's kind of like a Gantt chart, which we learned about in class. Gantt chart being you list out all of your tasks out in the very left side, and then the kind of the filled in blocks are how much time it's taking, and here it says it's weeks. And so it gives you an idea of how long each task is going to take, and more importantly, or equally as important, when you can actually start them. So for instance here, it looks like the second task, determine staff knowledge and attitudes, can only happen after task 1 is complete, research tablet use. Whereas task 3 looks like it can happen halfway through task 2. You don't have to wait till task 2 is done. You can wait only for halfway. So that's why these task schedules are kind of important, because you can budget out your time very nicely, because you do want to reduce how much time you are spending on this project, right? Time is money. The more time you spend, the more money you're going to have to spend as well. Of course, any kind of bar charts. And then down here is a network diagram, which has basically the same purpose, supposed to map out or schedule out how long a project or proposal is set to take. And then there is a description of evaluation techniques. So how do you know your solution is going to be effective, after it's all done and implemented? And I have a series of, questions or things to look at right here. But really, once you implement some kind of solution and the supplier leaves, or whoever leaves after the project is quote done, there has to be some kind of measure to indicate that the machine is running, for instance, at what was promised. So in industry, there's this term called OEE, and it stands for overall equipment effectiveness. It's how often the machine is running, and you want it to be really, really, really high. Like it goes by percentages. 70% is about world class. If you get up to the 90s, you're golden. Anything below 70, you should probably try to fix. But it's how efficient the machine is essentially running. It's the time that it's running for. And so typically when a company buys a new machine, there's a promise of a specific OEE. Like, okay, we'll monitor the OEE for your machine for the first month. And on average, it has to be at 95% daily. Or we'll come back and we'll perform, more work on it to make sure it does get up to that level. So there has to be some kind of technique or action or standard to which the solution you implemented through your proposal is indeed working. So let's see, how will we show our results will be effective? Yeah. Progress reports, statistical analysis. Statistical analysis kind of goes back to the OEE thing. Obviously, OEE is not the only example when it comes to machines or anything in industry, but you can perform any kind of analysis to indicate how well something works. Progress reports you can use during the project life cycle, the project cycle. Maybe weekly or monthly you have progress reports on how much you've accomplished, how are we doing on budget, how are we doing with time, stuff like that. See, how much work is performed inside and how much work is performed outside of the organization is important. And, is who is going to evaluate this performance? Is it going to be someone inside that is the task to do it, or someone outside? For instance, with the OEE example, you're going to have the supplier, the manufacturer of the machine, come in and they're an outside organization. They're going to be the ones evaluating whether it works or not. Whereas inside, maybe if you have an internal project, you have a specific staff member or employee or something like that is tasked with keeping up with how well the solution is working in the weeks and months leading after the solution has been implemented. And then there are different types of evaluation metrics you might want to look at. Quantitative versus qualitative, right? Stats or numbers like we've been talking about. Or sometimes you can do qualitative ones, like any kind of visual inspection. Is there any, some kind of color or shape, or is there any kind of damage done to certain parts? So you do some sort of visual inspection to see if everything is running smoothly. And that's fairly obvious as well. You don't need numbers necessarily, but you can use very basic metrics just to make sure everything is going along okay. Okay, and that would be the bibliography. All right, and the assignment for this. So again, pretty simple because I just introduced the instruction manual project last video. But this one it really ties into the project as well. And the prompt is very similar to the problem statements of the design brief that I sent out. So it says you need funding to manufacture and market your invention, so you find a few banks that might be willing to lend you the money. To convince them to fund your operations, you decide to write and send them a proposal detailing the benefits of your product, why they should invest in you, and why they should invest in you. Write this proposal and submit it to Google Classroom. Use the object you chose for your instruction manual project. If you chose an already invented product, imagine you are the first to invent it, which is something I went over last video, I believe. So nothing new here. Just come up with a proposal. It doesn't have to be 10 pages long. It could be like 1 page long or a couple pages long. But this is just practice on how to write a formal proposal. And that way you get some experience later on. If you start working in an internship or some kind of job, you have the ability to impress your boss or someone else with your proposal writing skills. Okay? That's pretty much it. So tune in next time for the next lesson on recommendation reports, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.